Hello, friends, families, and folks. This is Susanna Reen, and Inspiration's the theme. And this is Susie's Sunday service, I suppose. And it will be coming today to you primarily through some of the words of the Christian tradition. And I don't know if you remember or if you saw it, but last week I made this for myself. Will I walk with those in my care? And I put it up where I could see it this week. And it was very interesting to me, some of the outreach that came into my pathway. It came into my pathway with people who need healing. It came in my pathway in people who need food and who are hungry. It came in my pathway of people who need representation against powerful forces. So it was interesting this week to look at that sign and make some decisions about, will I walk with those placed in my care? And that's a choice we all have. What has been on my mind this morning, in part, is I was a very long time, I was watching the movement with George Floyd, but I was a long time before I could actually watch the video. I had watched part of it and could not continue. I watched the whole thing this week as I felt that was an exercise that was important for my growth. And I'm sad to say it because I'm a mother, but I think it would be sad for any of us to hear it. I do want to share with you that it's so sad when I think of it, but George called out for his mother. And his mother, you may or may not know, was previously deceased by George. And so there have been many near-death experiences recorded in history and in books and in videos and in movies and so on, documentaries. So it would be my choice of thinking, and what I would like to think is that perhaps George sensed his mother near. Anyway, I was also doing some reading, and I was wondering if we could look at this for this week coming. And one is that in Galatians is written by Paul, and Paul wrote this about 50 years after the life and death of Jesus. And what's important to know about Paul, we talked about it last week, is that Paul not only was not a follower of Jesus, he actually tried to sabotage Jesus's movement. So when we think about the movement that are going on with George Floyd and trying to look at racism, and not just prejudice. Prejudice is if we don't like people with red hair, we don't like people who have long fingernails. You know, that's prejudice, it's personal. What we're talking about is systemic racism, how we are taught from the time we're born whether white is good and black is not as good. And it's built into our systems. Our starting point is not the same. We start far further ahead than anyone who has darker skin than I, for example. That's another conversation. But what I would like to share is that this movement is being scorned at by some people. And Paul certainly scorned at Jesus's movement. And Jesus's movement was really about breaking some of the rules that he didn't think made sense in society. Systemic racism. Jesus fought against systemic racism. And eventually Paul got on board with him. And what's kind of nice, I think, is if I could read to you Galatians 2:15 and 16, he says, we Jews have no advantage or birth over non-Jews. And it was basically talking about the fact that we are all born the same. It talks about that in Galatians. We're not born different. We are born as with a human heart and with a human desire to be loved and to be healed, just like anyone else, no matter what our skin looks like. And Paul is preaching, he says, I quit being a lawman and I became a man of God's kingdom. And in that he talks about not serving the world only for his own good, but for the good of the all and to the wider community. And also, it talks about if we are to follow what Jesus's movement is to get rid of, to die to our smaller selves and to expand and grow and have the freedom of being a larger self. And in that we use the word crucifixion, and that we die to ourselves, we die to our egos, we die to self-judgment, and we die to judgment of others. And that we just get a more level field of power. leveling the power, the field of power. And so further down in Galatians, it talks to say we are not to fall back into rule keeping, peer pleasing, religion. Because if we were to do so, we would be abandoning the personal walk and free relationship we have if we look at Jesus's movement. Jesus is about, knowing the truth and it'll set you free. And then we don't need to be anything for anyone else. And they don't need to be anything for us. We just need to be. And to be means to, and in the sense of the Christian tradition, it talks about the kingdom of God. It's about being kin, being brothers and sisters with one another, and to stand in solidarity with one another, and to stand in non-judgment of one another, and to meet people where they're at. If they're further behind than you or they're further ahead, to do the best to speak a language that speaks to all of us. And maybe that's all I have to say about that. I'm looking at my words here. Yeah, and it says here, when Jesus sent the 12 out into the world, the 12 disciples, his instructions were simple. He told them to preach the kingdom of God, preach that we are brothers and sisters, we're all human, and to heal. That's the only two things, right? And we are able to heal one another with love. And it goes on to say, with the implication that to do either right was in effect to do both. You can't love without healing. Fortunately for the world in general and the church in particular, the ability to do them is not dependent on either moral character or IQ. To do them in the name of Christ is to be a minister. So I guess my implication on myself and sharing it with yourself as I have my meditation today would be, if I go out into the world this week coming, will I do it in the hopes of loving and healing, and to recognize that one is not dependent of the other. To do one is to do both. So next I'll be singing a song, and I hope it pertains to this. Haven't picked it out yet, so I'll do the shuffle and see what we get maybe. And thanks for joining me, and I hope it fed some of your soul. And I hope it fed some of mine. I'm still trying to figure it out. Okay, have a great Sunday Sabbath, and thanks for joining Susie's Sunday service. Hope to see you next week.